Hey there, how's it going? It's time for the Ultimate Game Jam Round 3. This is the final round, so if you haven't seen the first two videos, I would suggest checking them out, as everything we do today builds off of those. But if you can't be bothered, or you watched them a little while ago and need a refresher, here's the gist. The Ultimate Game Jam is a game jam comprised of YouTubers with elimination-style cuts at the end of each round. There are 3 rounds in total. In round 1, all contestants received a theme and 7 days to make their game. The theme was Decay, and I made a top-down shooter that wanted to be a roguelike, but really wasn't. It had a bad stat system, poor level design, and the difficulty was just way too high. But the movement and falling floor mechanics were fun enough to take second place in judging, securing a spot in round 2, which has us expanding on the same game, this time adding the new mechanic of money. The game changed from a wannabe roguelike to having a linear movement focus with a score counter that can be spent on power-ups. I ran into some major issues and nearly didn't finish in time, but once again, I take the number 2 spot. Although this time, that was just good enough to make it into round 3. And now, I have to go head-to-head with Yannick, whose game Robreak has taken the number 1 spot in both of the previous rounds. So, I definitely need to do something different in round 3, because at this stage, second place won't be good enough. As with the previous rounds, we received a window and were allowed to choose 4 consecutive days to make our updates. I chose the 5th through the 8th and hoped for a merciful final mechanic. Unlike going into round 2, I was actually happy with the gameplay this time, so I didn't have to worry about redoing the entirety of the game this round. Which means depending on what I needed to add, it shouldn't actually be that bad. And then I got the new mechanic, which just messed everything up. No, I'm actually kidding. For what feels like the first time in this entire competition, something went my way. The new mechanic we have to add is Special Ability, which just lends itself so well to this game. And to make things even better, I was already planning to add one of those anyway. So, with everything coming up Millhouse, I got to work while on stream that day. The ability that I already wanted to add was a way to not fall to your death if you made a misstep. Basically, a mulligan on movement. My thought is that if the player has the ability available when they would fall, instead flight is automatically activated for a few seconds, allowing them to get back to a still standing floor tile. This required adding a new check when the game would set the player's state to falling. Currently, if the player is not over a floor tile, a short counter begins. When the counter hits 0, the player falls. This allows a little leeway for the player if they're just slightly off of the tile and need to get back. So I just needed to add another check to see if flight is available before I set the player's state to fall. For testing, I added a green player outline to show when flight is activated. I also added a flashing effect that triggers right before the flight is about to run out, so the player has a clear indication of when it's ending. Once it ends, if the player is still not on the ground, the fall buffer counts again, and falling happens as normal. With the ability in and working, now I have to figure out how to turn it on. To encourage combat, I tied the special ability to killing enemies. I added a placeholder energy bar that will fill up as enemies are destroyed. Everything was going great until once again the curse that is the enemies in this project decided that I was just making far too much progress. If you remember from the last 2 videos, the enemies just don't want to work. To be more accurate, the way I wrote them just doesn't always work correctly. This is also around the time that my competition stopped by to spy on my progress. Hi Yannick, thank you for the follow. After futzing around with the enemies for a good bit, I couldn't solve the issue where sometimes they just won't die. But it really only seems to be happening when there are several of them all clumped up together. So, as usual, I made it Future Me's problem, and I moved on. My hope was to add a few more abilities, so I opened up ideas to my Twitch chat. I got a lot of great suggestions, and sadly had to turn down some good ones because it would require rewriting some core mechanics for the game. For example, there were a lot of suggestions that involved bringing floor tiles back after they've fallen. But unfortunately, the way I've set up the tiles in this game, when they fall, they actually destroy themselves. I already knew that Future Me was going to have a lot of issues dealing with the enemies and getting all that figured out, so changing the way a core mechanic works at this stage, I felt was going to cause far too many problems. When dealing with game jams and short time limits, that just has to be considered, and I've already pushed my luck in the last 2 rounds. So sometimes good ideas need to be shelved because they just won't fit at this moment. We eventually decided on adding a decoy ability to make the enemies not target the player. Think alluring skulls in Dark Souls. I created a placeholder sprite with some particles to test it out. Next, I have to change the way the enemies target. Normally, they are idle until the player gets within a certain range. Then, if they move, they switch to chase mode, where they move towards the player's position. I created a new variable to keep track of how many decoys the player has created. If the enemy is in chase mode, and this variable is higher than 0, then the enemy's target is switched to the nearest decoy. Once the timer on the decoy runs out, it subtracts from the variable until there are no decoys left out and the variable is set to 0. At that point, the enemy's target changes back to the player. With the 2 new abilities working, I jumped over to Photoshop to figure out the art and UI. My original plan for the flying ability was to have the player glow and sparkle or something like that. Then someone in my chat suggested wings, and I thought that was a great idea. I began to make some big angel-like wings, but before I got too far into it, my wife, who is known as Ladylark, had the idea that bat wings would be easier to draw and fit better aesthetically. And we have a saying in my Twitch chat, that Ladylark is always right and has all the best ideas. So of course I had to try it out, and of course it looked great. I created some animation frames for the wings flapping, but unfortunately they were kind of in the wrong angle. As you can see, these wings would work great if we were on a side-on perspective like a platformer, but in this top-down perspective, it's just not quite right. However, I was out of time on the stream, so I just threw the art in anyway just to see how it feels. And aside from the fact that they're flapping in the wrong direction, it looked great and it shouldn't take me too long to fix. The next day, I got back to work on the art. I fixed the wings and created more visually appealing progress bar for them. I wanted to match the heart UI that was already in the game, and I think it came out pretty well. I added the fixed animations and new UI to the game, as well as some particle effects to really sell that the player has been saved by the wings. Great, with that in, now I need to figure out what I'm going to make this decoy look like. I went back and forth for a little while, and I eventually settled on just making a circle with the player's eyes in it, and it ended up looking super cute. It also makes a lot of sense for a decoy since it looks like the player. I added the new art to the game and used the same UI concepts I used for the crystal shard, an image of the decoy with a number next to it letting you know how many you have. If you currently don't have any decoys, the UI hides itself. And that's where I had to call it on day 2. As usual, there's always one day in these challenges where I don't get any work done. Day 3 was that for me. My final day to work on the game, and it's actually in a pretty good state. The new required mechanic of special ability is in, working, and has art. I'd hoped to add more to the game, more abilities, more levels, etc. But looking at the time, I realized that was a one-way ticket to screwing everything up with hastily implemented ideas. This is the last round, which means at the end I want to have the best complete game package that I can, meaning there's a lot of polish to add to bring everything together. I started by giving a lighting effect to the players and objects, which just adds a bit more atmosphere. I've actually wanted to do this since round 1, and just never found the time in the last 2 rounds. I threw in a tooltip to the decoy UI so the player knows which button to push to use it. It's a small thing, but I think it's helpful for abilities that are not used as often as other ones. And now the point that I dread in every project. I'm now future me. The enemies need to be figured out, I've got to fix them, and I've got to make them work. Again, this has been a common trend through this whole competition. It's the last day, let's spend several hours rewriting the enemy AI. But this time, I recently found a YouTuber named BliskinX that makes devlogs and tutorials. They have a construct tutorial series that's just fantastic, and I've learned so much from it. They also do Unity and Godot tutorials and have way too few subscribers, so please check them out. I definitely wouldn't have figured all this out without those tutorials. So I used a lot of what I learned from their enemy AI episode and applied it to my enemies. There was still a fair amount of tweaking to get everything working, but in the end they finally started acting the way I expected them to. And as an extra bonus, I still had a few hours left before I needed to submit, which is great because I still wanted to fix up the boss a little bit. In round 2, the boss was a bit of a joke, especially if you picked up a bunch of damage ups. By the way, I also nerfed damage ups. Instead of giving you a +1, they give you a +0.5. I removed the ability to stun the boss, and I enclosed the arena a little bit more. Once you enter, a wall appears behind you, locking you in. The boss no longer just follows the player either. It will for a time, but every so often it will choose a different direction to move in and fire. This creates a less predictable pattern that's harder for the player to anticipate. The boss is still fairly easy, and a decoy will distract him just fine, but I do think this is much better than round 2. I quickly updated the You Win screen to better show the number of shards the player has collected. I feel like this is something that wasn't emphasized before because the text was all the same color. Alright, it's 10 PM at this point, and there's only a handful of things left to do. It's at this point that I started to kind of panic at the fact that I wasn't really panicking yet, but I ignored that feeling and I pushed on. There's currently no way to obtain decoys other than my debug keys, so I really needed to fix that. Instead of making them an ability like I thought I would, I figured the best implementation was to make them a shop item. So now at the start of each level, the player has a choice to purchase a health up, a damage up, or a couple decoys. I also raised the price of everything a little bit and then went through each level adding more shards that the player can collect. I chose not to add any more levels as I felt the time was better used to fix up the current ones and make them as fun as possible. I then added sound effects for the new elements and added a couple new music tracks, one for the boss room and one for the menu. and as I was updating the how to play image, I realized, holy crap, I still have time to playtest. I wasn't able to do that the last 2 rounds, and considering this is the last one, it really needed it. I did find a few bugs that I wouldn't have found if I hadn't had that time, so that's awesome. I uploaded the game to itch, and I posted my link to Discord. Then I sat back, and I kind of felt like I forgot something because the last half hour was a bit stressful, but it was nothing compared to rounds 1 and 2. I did later find a couple of audio bugs, but really nothing major. I guess I'm just so conditioned to be stressed out at the end that if I'm not, something feels wrong. In the end, I'm really pleased with the final result. I love the movement in this game, and now all of the elements help to emphasize that. The player has a choice to make if they want to go for a high score or spend their shards on power-ups to make the game easier. They also have the option to fight and build up a second chance to help save them in the future if they need it. It's been a lot of fun to watch this game evolve. It started as a fun movement mechanic with a bad power-up system and poor level design. Now, it's effectively a top-down shooter platformer. Seriously, if you think about the dash as a jump, it kinda works. I think it's a lot of fun to play, and the only thing I feel that's still missing is a speedrun timer and permanently keeping track of your highest score, both of which I hope to add in the near future. Until then, this game is available to play on my itch page if you'd like to check it out. This video is coming out a bit late because I had some computer issues, so a lot of you already know the final results of the jam, since Yannick's video came out a couple weeks ago. But if you don't know, the winner of the Ultimate Game Jam Season 1 is... Wait, it's me? I'm not gonna lie here, I was totally shocked when I saw that. I guess the focus on creating a final put-together game really paid off. I'd like to say thank you to the hosts and judges, Metabulous and Zyger, for organizing this whole thing. It was a lot of fun and I really enjoyed it. To Yannick, it was a great competition. Your game is awesome and you pushed me to make Tread Carefully the best game I could. If you haven't played Row Break, I would highly recommend it. He's already updated the game after the jam and it's fantastic. Also, check out Yannick's devlog to see his perspective on the jam. And with that, we bring the Ultimate Game Jam to a close. I had a lot of fun, a lot of stress, and came out with a really fun game. What more can you really ask for? Thank you all very much for watching, I really do appreciate it. And a special thank you to my video producer tier patrons that are so generous in these crazy times. If you would like to see your name in a future video or game and want to see these videos before anyone else, the link is in the description. If you would like to get a hold of me, you can message me on Twitter, talk to me during my live streams, or better yet, join the Discord with me and a bunch of other really cool people. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more in the future, please consider liking and subscribing, and I will talk with you next time. Have a good one. Later.